Hello AQA language and literature students, and welcome to another Paris in 5 minutes video where we analyse one of the texts from the Remembered Place unit. In this case we will be analysing The 7 Ages of Paris by Alistair Horne, a text that initially I think on first look can be quite intimidating, but I very much hope that the insight in this video will help you approach this text with confidence should it rear its ugly head in an exam. So, to the summary, this is a work of popular history in which the author, Alistair Horne, describes the development of Paris during the Restoration period of 1815 to 30. This is after Napoleon has been deposed and the monarchy has been briefly restored. Horne describes the urban topography, the landscape of Paris at the time. He describes the economic conditions for the poor, particularly as they are represented in the literature of the age and the great novelists. He describes shockingly unhygienic conditions that caused 2 major cholera outbreaks during this time, and then finally, in a chapter entitled Bread and Circuses, he explores the entertainments of the age, concluding on the colonisation of Algeria. Horne died aged 91 in 2017, and his obituary in The Guardian described him as a writer of remarkable range and productivity, best known for his brilliant evocations of the most turbulent periods in French military and political history. Horne's books were always aimed at the informed reading public rather than university students or academic specialists, but nevertheless had considerable appeal for those groups too. He had a rare gift for bringing alive places, people, sounds and even smells, and I think the truth of that description is borne out by the extract that we are looking at. His publishers have also described this particular volume as interweaving historical narrative with telling detail. This is a fluent and definitive work of social and cultural history. High praise indeed, and obviously the publishers themselves have the book to sell, but I do really think after reading this is a very elegant and well written text and an outstanding style model for anyone who aims to have a very professional but also a stylish way of writing. In terms of context, it is clearly a written text, but one with an elevated register. Its aspects of mode, it is designed with permanence in mind, and it is a highly crafted text. It belongs to the genre of popular history, with a focus on social and cultural history. The purpose of a text like this is obviously informative, but also it's not a purely academic work. It's also designed to be entertaining and enjoyable to read. People who would enjoy reading this, I think we can probably describe as intellectuals, or at any rate people with an interest, or people who take enjoyment from culture, politics, sociology and history. As suggested in his obituary, it may well be that this text also has academic value for people researching Paris in the age. With regard to the subjects, Horne covers architecture, infrastructure, literature, transport, culture and hygiene, but all specifically of the age of Restoration Paris. So, regarding representations, the Restoration period in Paris is represented as an interesting and significant time in the formation of the city. Particularly, it is shown as an era for artistic figures and innovators, including authors and composers, and Horne represents many of these figures with a kind of respectful reverence. Horne equally seems to revel in descriptions of the wonder of Parisian architecture, but contrasting these positive representations, there are representations of the depravity and filth of poor Paris. These are often presented in considerable descriptive detail. Horne's writing, therefore, is very much focused on these extremities of Parisian life in the age, and I think that helps to make his writing memorable and engaging for his readers. He's focused on what we are interested in, which is what's really distinctive about Paris at this time. Horne, I feel, has a lightly critical representation of Paris's political leaders and attitudes of the time, with some subtly ironic remarks about the failures and misconceptions of the age, and I think that is common of popular histories, because of course, looking back, it's very easy to see what people got wrong. And Horne, I would say, is lightly critical, but he doesn't put forward any strong arguments either way, but perhaps some of his comments are tellingly critical. With regard to the way that he as an author self-represents himself, he isn't a kind of a direct self-representation in this text. He doesn't make his own opinions obtrusive or obvious, but they are subtly there. The focus throughout really is on the subject rather than the author himself, but Horne is indirectly representing his own expertise and his authority and his skill as a writer, and this is represented through the quality of the research, which is very detailed, and the writing, which is both elegant and precise. And of course, these are also reflections of the taste of his discerning readership, who take interest not only in the detail of the writing, but also particularly in the quality of the writing. With regard to the discourse features, there was quite a lot that I could dig out of this, so I organised it into 2 pages on this occasion, mainly because I think this is a great text for analysing discourse and looking at the way that a text is composed in a complex manner. There are headers in this extract which connect the section presented to the overall works. The title of the work is The 7 Ages of Paris, and if you look at the headers, it's clear that this is age 5, 1815 to 1871. The other header on the right-hand facing page gives some indication of the main events, saying, as I think it does, something like monarchy and revolution. Within this section then there are chapter headings, or the chapter main heading, which is the profile of Restoration Paris, is then followed by subsequent subheadings, life for the poor and health and hygiene being 2 examples. And these organise the discourse into these clear units which are organised by subject. And that helps give readers clear guidance on what they expect to find in each subject. And it gives the subjects themselves a kind of cohesion in that they have introductory and concluding passages. Within these sections then, aspects of Parisian history are framed through those introductions, which connect them often to other sections of the text, so perhaps other ages of Paris, references back to the Napoleonic era which was just past. And that enables us as readers to see changes in the city, or to, I suppose, frame our understanding of what happened during the Restoration period compared to developments in the past or even in the future. Focus within these sections then is frequently shifting towards related aspects of the city, perhaps rather than following a clear narrative thread. And I don't really think, although despite the description of the publishers, I don't really feel that the sections presented are narrative throughout, but there are parts of the description where there appears to be some narrative sequencing or some chronological sequencing of events. If you look closely at the political attempts to clean up the city from lines 249 to 262, you can see that clearly Horne is sequencing information. Although often in his sections he uses references to the date to move backwards and forwards in time, given the relevance of his particular focus for that section. The references are a key feature of the discourse here. So this is material that Horne has clearly researched and then presents within his own discourse in order to illuminate the reader to different perspectives. There are frequent uses of shorter quotations which are embedded within Horne's own description, and he has kept the attributions of these references quite minimal. Sometimes he just mentions quite briefly that a report of the time, for example. So he doesn't always give these a heavy amount of context or detailed kind of references or attributions. Instead, he presents the detail itself, so the quote itself is presented in the flow of his writing, and this helps these references to really not be too obtrusive. I think if you're reading heavier academic work, where academic rigour is really important, these references can become really detailed and it can become really quite burdensome to read. But then those are texts where the informational function of the text is a much higher priority than any kind of enjoyment. Horne keeps it light and enjoyable by letting these references kind of flow without too much obtrusive detail. There are, of course, longer references, particularly where he's taken sections from literary evocations of Parisian squalor, particularly as represented by some of these great Parisian novelists, and these are presented in indented sections. Those sections do often have lengthy contextual introductions, which kind of frame the writing that he presents in with his own focus on this particular area of history. The effect of all of these references is to present a broad range of perspectives on Paris very fluently. With regards to the lexis and semantics in this extract, the lexis is clearly elevated and you get terms such as decrepitude and questionable blandishments. There are French and Latin lexis in the text, which are italicized but also rarely defined, which is quite a strong indication of the intellectual readership. And yes, I had to go on Google Translate to check out some of these meanings. Terrain vague, I'll have a crack at pronouncing this one in French. Enrichissez-vous, I think, which means, I think, self-enrichment, possibly. The status quo ante is a Latin phrase, and yes, that one had me scrambling for Google Translate as well. These all indicate the intellectual readership of the text. He has a number of literary flourishes in his writing, which are quite enjoyable and overall indicate really writing of the highest quality, I think. There is a floral semantic field, which he uses to describe the literary blossoming of Parisian novelists. That's on lines 114 to 126, and again that's this kind of reverential representation of the literary figures of the age, and you might put that in comparison to some of the other representations in the Paris Anthology of the way that Paris is a central hub for writers. A number of other of our authors are highly respectful towards Paris's literary tradition. Elsewhere, there are figurative devices which are quite entertaining in the way that they convey very powerful images, very evocative sensory images. The working classes are described as perhaps one day erupting to spew out once again like lava into bourgeois Paris. That's on line 184. There are also description of the new effects of the gaslights in line 280 is both evocative and quite ironic, and I suggest you look closely at that section for some of its descriptive qualities if you'd like to investigate the lexis and semantics in this text. Finally then, for linguistic features, the grammar of this text, the forms are varied and complex throughout. Horne clearly has control of a very fluent control of a range of forms, and it's quite bewildering to really unpick his sentences and quite challenging sometimes to identify these complex forms that he's using. They include sentence forms like subordinating clauses, coordinating clauses, listing, using parenthetical forms, which means to insert clauses and phrases, either using commas, brackets, or sometimes dashes, all of which have very subtle and varied effects. The function of these complex and varied forms is to create layered meanings and add supplementary detail to the text. The text is quite dense, but it also manages to maintain a kind of fluidity. He does mix it up. There are some shorter forms which foreground irony in some cases, or sometimes act as a discourse feature, introducing a new topic, functioning as topic markers. So finally, what connections might you make with this text between other texts in the Paris Anthology? Representations of transport, as are presented in Mile by Mile, although both this text and Mile by Mile are both a popular history, although this one is perhaps much higher in its register than Mile by Mile, and has a much more formal and probably the academic tone to this text is something that Mile by Mile doesn't really share. But they do both have a detailed and fluid description, which really attempt to immerse the reader in the experience of Paris in certain ages. Comparing this text with the Pathé newsreel transcript from the riots in 1968 would be an interesting way of exploring how key events are presented at different times, but also through different modes. I think my favourite choice, if I was preparing for exams, would be to compare this particular text and the way that it's a specifically historical text, or specifically a piece of popular history. It would be great to compare with the youth-directed text Not for Parents, because both of these texts really share identical contexts, but they differ in their audience, in that this has a highly intellectual and possibly academic readership, whereas Not for Parents is written for children. So it would be very interesting to analyse the way that language directed to different receivers can vary in its features. Thank you then for your attention for this text. I hope that's made the text a little less daunting for you. As I said, this is a text that I really enjoyed, and it's a great model for aspirational writers, for really good quality writing that is both informative and engaging. Check out the other videos in the series, and please subscribe to this channel if you're studying the course. There are other videos out there that may well help you with other aspects of your study. Good luck with your revision, all the best, see you in the next video.